The training ground stretched endlessly beneath the hot desert sun, its barren landscape broken only by the faint shimmer of heat waves that rose off the sand like illusions. Dust clung to everything: boots, rifles, skin, even the air seemed to taste of grit. Recruits knelt in uneven rows, squinting through their scopes, fingers hovering uncertainly over triggers. The steady pop of live fire echoed across the range, a rhythm of precision punctuated by the occasional sharp rebuke from instructors who prowled the lines like hawks. For many it was just another day of drills, but for Elena Ramirez, it was a test she could not afford to fail. From the beginning, Elena knew she was different. Not because she wanted to be, but because others never let her forget it. At 26, with a lean frame and sharp features, she hardly looked like the stereotype of a soldier people carried in their heads. Where others had booming voices and brash confidence, she carried herself with quiet precision. Where some of her fellow trainees boasted endlessly about their marksmanship, Elena listened, studied, and reserved her words. That silence, however, was often mistaken for weakness. Rumors had spread quickly. She had only made it into the program because of a diversity initiative, some whispered. Others claimed she lacked the physical strength to endure the grueling regimen. A few laughed outright, saying she would never make it past the trial stages. Their words stung, but Elena swallowed them whole, using every drop of doubt like fuel in the fire she was quietly building inside. Her background didn't help her case. She hadn't grown up in a military family like many of the others. Her father was a mechanic, her mother a teacher. They lived in a cramped apartment in a neighborhood where sirens at night were more common than silence. From an early age she had learned to tune out noise, both literal and metaphorical. It was in that environment that she discovered her unusual gift: focus. While other kids squabbled and grew distracted, Elena could still her breathing, quiet her mind, and watch with an intensity that unnerved even her parents. When she was 13, she borrowed her uncle's old hunting rifle during a family camping trip and struck her first target, a tin can perched 100 yards away. No one believed she could hit it. But she did. First shot, center impact. That day her uncle called her La Francotiradora, the sharpshooter. She never forgot it. Years later, after enlisting, her gift would set her apart, but first it isolated her. Training with her unit was a daily exercise in endurance, both physical and psychological. The instructors were merciless, barking commands that broke even the strongest recruits. Push-ups until their arms failed, sprints across blistering sand until lungs burned, obstacle courses designed to strip away pride and ego. Many fell behind. Elena never did. Yet instead of admiration, her consistency seemed to breed suspicion. "She's just lucky," one recruit muttered after she breezed through a timed course. "Wait till she cracks." Another laughed when she scored near perfect on her first range qualification. "Fluke shot. Won't happen again." But the more they doubted her, the harder she worked in silence. At night, when the barracks settled into uneasy snores, Elena stayed awake, dismantling and reassembling her rifle until every motion was second nature. She practiced controlling her breath, lying still for hours, slowing her heartbeat until the world seemed to move in fragments around her. She studied wind, distance, and bullet trajectory, reading every manual she could get her hands on. While others clung to bravado, she built discipline brick by brick. And yet, no matter how well she performed, the skepticism followed her like a shadow. During one particularly grueling long-distance shooting drill, when the recruits were tasked with hitting a steel target 800 meters away, Elena hit it dead center on her second attempt. Instead of praise, the group erupted in whispers. "No way she did that without luck," someone scoffed. Another said, "She must have had help sighting in her rifle." Even the instructor's eyes narrowed, as though trying to decide whether to believe what he'd just seen. Elena kept her face impassive, but inside, frustration gnawed at her. How many times would she have to prove herself before they finally saw her skill for what it was? The real test came weeks later. The recruits were gathered for what the instructors called the impossible shot. It was a tradition, a brutal exercise designed not only to measure skill but also to expose weaknesses. The task was simple in description but nearly insurmountable in execution. Hit a moving target at extreme distance, across shifting desert winds under strict time pressure. Many seasoned shooters failed it. Most recruits never even came close. It was designed to humble, to remind even the best marksmen of their limits. That day, as the sun blazed overhead and the heat rose like an invisible wall, Elena felt the weight of every doubting word pressing down on her shoulders. One by one, recruits took their turn. Targets zipped across the far end of the range, distant blurs against the shimmering horizon. Shots cracked through the air, kicking up dirt, sparking harmlessly off steel far from the mark. Some trainees cursed, others clenched their teeth in frustration. None succeeded. As Elena watched, she knew this was the moment that would define her. If she failed, the whispers would become shouts, confirmation of what they already believed. But if she succeeded, if she made the shot no one thought possible, then perhaps, finally, the truth would outshine the doubt. When her name was called, Elena stepped forward, rifle in hand. The world seemed to grow quieter with each step. She knelt at the firing line, her body moving in a sequence of practiced precision. Dust stung her eyes, but she didn't blink. The murmurs of her fellow recruits barely reached her ears. Through the scope, the target flickered in and out of focus as it zipped along its unpredictable path. 1,000 calculations filled her mind. Wind speed, distance, bullet drop, timing. She inhaled slowly, letting her chest rise, then exhaled until her body felt weightless. In that instant, nothing else existed, not the doubt, not the heat, not the eyes burning into her back. Only the target, the rifle, and the stillness inside her. Her finger tightened on the trigger. The shot rang out, the crack of the rifle rolled across the desert like thunder, reverberating off the barren ridges before dissolving into silence. For an endless moment, no one moved. The target was still gliding at its erratic pace far across the range, a faint silhouette shimmering in the haze. Then, almost imperceptibly, a small puff of dust kicked up just behind it, followed by the sharp clang of metal as the bullet struck dead center. The sound carried back across the range like a verdict. Elena lowered her rifle slowly, her breathing calm, her heartbeat steady. She had felt it the instant she pulled the trigger, the certainty of connection, the alignment of instinct and calculation. Still, hearing the unmistakable ring of steel was something else entirely. The silence that followed was thick enough to cut. Recruits who had spent weeks mocking her now gawked with open mouths. A few shifted uncomfortably, muttering excuses under their breath. The instructors exchanged glances, their faces a mixture of surprise and something harder to define, respect perhaps, though none of them voiced it aloud. Elena didn't smile, didn't pump her fist in triumph. She simply unloaded her rifle, cleared the chamber, and set it down with the same quiet discipline she brought to every action. Inside, however, a spark had ignited. For the first time since she had arrived at the program, the weight of doubt seemed to lift, even if just slightly. But in the military, victories were fleeting. Recognition was rarer still. Within minutes, the range commander barked for the recruits to fall back into formation, as though Elena's impossible shot had been nothing more than a blip in routine training. No congratulations, no acknowledgement. The desert sun beat down on them all with the same relentless indifference. Elena fell into line, her face a mask of neutrality. Yet she could feel the stares boring into her, some laced with newfound respect, others with sharper envy. Her success had unsettled the fragile hierarchy of the group, and in the military, nothing stirred conflict like a challenge to pride. That evening in the mess hall, the atmosphere was noticeably different. Usually, Elena ate in silence, her presence overlooked or dismissed. Tonight, the whispers followed her like shadows. "Did you see that shot?" one recruit said in a hushed tone, leaning across the table. "No way she could have pulled that off unless she's some kind of prodigy." Another scoffed, but with less conviction than usual, "Probably just luck. Even a broken clock is right twice a day." Others avoided her gaze altogether, unable to reconcile what they had witnessed with the narrative they had built around her. Elena kept her eyes on her tray, forcing herself to eat slowly, deliberately, as though nothing had changed. She knew better than to draw attention to herself. Respect earned through one shot could vanish just as quickly if she faltered tomorrow. Later, as the recruits returned to the barracks, Sergeant Kovacs, one of the senior instructors, lingered by the doorway. He was a grizzled veteran with a scar running from his left temple down to his jaw, a man who rarely wasted words. As Elena passed, he caught her eye. For a moment, she braced herself for criticism. Instead, he gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. It was not praise, but from Kovacs, it was more valuable than a medal. Elena carried that gesture with her into the night, replaying it in her mind as she lay awake on her bunk. Sleep did not come easily. Her body ached from the day's drills, but her mind was alive, turning over what had happened. She had done what no one believed was possible, but what did it mean? Was it enough to silence the doubters, or would they simply invent new reasons to dismiss her? In her heart, Elena knew this was only the beginning. The shot had proven her potential, but potential was not enough. She needed to show that her skill was not a fluke, not an anomaly, but the result of discipline, training, and unshakable focus. If she wanted to survive not just the program but the missions that lay beyond it, she would have to do it again and again. Under pressure, under scrutiny, in circumstances far harsher than a controlled training range. The following days brought no reprieve. The instructors increased the intensity of their drills, pushing the recruits to their breaking points. Long marches under the blistering sun with full packs, live-fire exercises in mock urban settings, timed obstacle courses with no margin for error. Some recruits dropped out, their bodies giving in to exhaustion or injury. Others began to falter mentally, their confidence unraveling with each failure. Elena endured it all with the same quiet resolve that had carried her this far. She did not complain, did not boast, did not ask for acknowledgement. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the tide began to shift. One morning, during a particularly punishing endurance march, a fellow recruit named Harris collapsed in the sand, his legs trembling too violently to stand. Most of the unit pressed forward, unwilling to risk their own times to help him. Elena, without hesitation, stepped out of formation, hooked his arm over her shoulder, and half-carried him until he could walk again. Her own score suffered for it, but when the sergeant barked at her, she only nodded and said, "We don't leave anyone behind." Harris, who had once been among her loudest critics, said nothing at the time. But later that evening he approached her quietly in the barracks. "Thanks," he muttered, eyes downcast. It wasn't much, but it was a start. By the end of the second month, Elena's reputation had changed in subtle but undeniable ways. The whispers of doubt still lingered, but they were tempered now by a grudging respect. Recruits who once laughed at her began to ask her advice on marksmanship. A few even sought her out during off hours for help with breathing techniques and sight alignment. She offered guidance sparingly, not out of arrogance but because she understood that true skill could not be handed over like a piece of equipment. It had to be built through effort, through failure, through persistence. Yet not everyone welcomed her growing presence. A recruit named Dalton, tall and broad-shouldered with the swagger of someone used to being the best, took her success as a personal affront. He had been the unofficial top marksman before Elena's impossible shot, and his pride could not withstand the idea of being overshadowed. He taunted her during drills, mocked her behind her back, and once even accidentally jostled her rifle during practice. Elena never rose to the bait. She knew that people like Dalton thrived on reaction, and denying him that satisfaction was its own quiet victory. Still, she could feel the tension building, a storm waiting for the right moment to break. That moment came sooner than expected. The instructors announced a new exercise, a simulated battlefield scenario that would combine endurance, navigation, and live-fire accuracy. Teams of 4 would be dropped in different sectors and tasked with locating and eliminating a series of hidden targets under strict time limits. It was the kind of challenge designed to weed out the unprepared and expose weakness. When the team assignments were read, Elena's name was paired with Dalton's. She could almost feel his glare burning into her as the group dispersed to prepare. This was no longer just about completing the exercise. For Dalton, it was about proving that Elena's reputation was undeserved, that her impossible shot had been nothing more than luck. For Elena, it was another chance to demonstrate that she belonged, not just as a shooter but as a soldier. As the sun dipped below the horizon that evening, painting the desert sky in shades of fire and shadow, Elena lay awake on her bunk, listening to the murmurs of the barracks. She thought of the shot that had changed everything, the clang of steel still ringing in her ears. Tomorrow would bring another test, another trial of skill and resolve. The difference now was that she no longer carried only her own doubts. She carried the weight of expectation, of resentment, of fragile respect. And she knew with unshakable certainty that the next shot she took might matter even more than the one no one believed was possible. The dawn broke with a cruel sharpness, the kind of light that cut across the desert without warmth, painting every dune and ridge in stark relief. The recruits stood assembled in full gear, rifles slung, packs strapped heavy across their shoulders. Their breaths misted faintly in the chill of early morning, though everyone knew the heat would come soon enough, baking the sand until it felt like fire beneath their boots. The instructors prowled the lines, handing out sealed envelopes that contained each team's coordinates and objectives. The rules were simple: move fast, stay sharp, find the hidden targets, and neutralize them before time ran out. Every mistake would be logged. Every hesitation would be noted. Elena adjusted the straps of her pack as she received her envelope, her expression calm, unreadable. Around her, recruits muttered among themselves, tension buzzing in the air like static. When her eyes flicked to the side, she saw Dalton standing just a few feet away, jaw tight, eyes cold. Their team had been rounded out with Harris, the recruit she had once helped during the endurance march, and a quiet, wiry kid named Liang who barely spoke but never seemed to miss a thing. It was an odd mix, a team held together by nothing more than circumstance. Elena knew that success would depend less on skill and more on whether they could find a way to function as a unit. Sergeant Kovacs's voice cut through the murmurs. "You have 6 hours. Make them count. Move out." The desert swallowed them quickly, the camp disappearing behind a haze of rising dust. Elena unfolded the envelope as they trudged forward, scanning the coordinates and objectives. There were 3 targets, one at the base of a rocky ridge nearly 2 miles north, another concealed in a dry riverbed, and a final one perched high on a cliffside to the east. Each had to be located and marked with a confirmed shot before their time ran out. She noted the distances, the terrain, the probable wind conditions. Already her mind was mapping out routes, estimating time frames, calculating angles of fire. "We should hit the ridge first," Elena said, her voice calm but firm. "It's the farthest and it'll eat the most time. If we save it for last, we'll be rushing." Dalton snorted. "Or we hit the riverbed first, take the easy win, then move to the ridge. Better for morale." Elena met his eyes steadily. "Better for morale, worse for the clock. You know it." Harris shifted uncomfortably between them. "She's right," he said at last. "If we burn too much time early, we'll fail the whole exercise." Dalton's scowl deepened, but he didn't argue further. He adjusted his rifle strap with a jerky motion and muttered, "Fine. Ridge first." The resentment in his tone was obvious, but Elena didn't rise to it. She simply nodded and began leading the way, setting a steady pace across the uneven sand. The march was grueling. The sun climbed higher, turning the desert into a furnace. Heat shimmered in the air, distorting the horizon into wavering illusions. Sweat stung Elena's eyes, but she pushed forward, scanning the terrain with practiced precision. She could feel the weight of Dalton's glare on her back, as though he were waiting for her to falter. But she didn't. Every step was measured, every breath controlled. This wasn't about proving herself to Dalton or to anyone else. It was about completing the mission no matter the obstacles. When they finally reached the ridge, nearly an hour had passed. The jagged rocks offered some relief from the sun but also created shadows and angles that made spotting the target difficult. Elena dropped to one knee, unslinging her rifle. Through the scope she scanned the landscape, eyes sharp, breath steady. Then she saw it, a faint glint of steel, half buried in the rocks nearly 700 meters away. The placement was cunning, designed to blend into the environment. She marked the position with a small gesture, then settled into position. "Target 700 out, slight right," she murmured. Dalton crouched beside her, scowling. "I see it." "Wind shifting left to right," she continued, her voice steady. "Compensate 1/2 mil." Dalton bristled. "I don't need you telling me how to shoot." Before she could reply, he shouldered his rifle and fired. The shot cracked through the air, sparking off the rocks several feet from the target. The metallic ring of failure echoed across the ridge. Dalton cursed, adjusting his scope. He fired again. Another miss. "Wasting rounds won't help," Elena said quietly. She adjusted her own scope, calculating the wind drift, the angle of the sun, the shimmer of heat. Then she exhaled slowly, letting the world narrow down to the target and the stillness inside her. Her finger tightened. The shot rang out. A heartbeat later, the clang of impact reverberated across the rocks. Dead center. Harris let out a low whistle. Liang simply nodded, eyes wide. Dalton's jaw clenched tight, but he said nothing. Elena cleared the chamber and stood, slinging her rifle smoothly. "One down," she said. "Riverbed's next." The trek to the riverbed was harder. The terrain dipped and rose in uneven swells, the sand loosening under their boots. Dalton lagged behind at times, his frustration palpable, but Harris and Liang fell into rhythm with Elena, moving as one. By the time they reached the dry channel, their water reserves were low, and the sun was a merciless weight on their shoulders. The second target was harder to find. The riverbed twisted and wound like a scar across the desert, with dozens of nooks where the target could be hidden. They split up into pairs, Elena with Harris, Dalton with Liang, scanning the area inch by inch. After nearly 20 minutes of searching, Harris spotted a faint outline tucked into the hollow of a dried-out tree trunk. Elena confirmed it through her scope, another steel plate, camouflaged against the bark. This shot was trickier, nearly 500 meters with a crosswind pushing hard across the channel. Harris offered to take it, but Elena shook her head. "I'll handle it." She lay prone in the sand, adjusting her rifle with meticulous care. The wind tugged at her clothes, shifting the grains of sand beneath her. She slowed her breathing, timing it to the gusts, waiting for the perfect lull. Then, in a moment of absolute stillness, she squeezed the trigger. The bullet flew true, striking the plate with a satisfying clang. Harris grinned despite himself. By the time they regrouped with Dalton and Leung, Elena could see the storm brewing in Dalton's eyes. His pride was bleeding and every one of her successes cut deeper. Still, he said nothing as they set out for the final objective, the cliffside target. The climb was brutal. Loose rocks shifted underfoot, and the incline burned their legs with every step. By the time they reached the ledge, their time was running thin. The target was perched on a precarious outcropping nearly 900 meters away, the longest shot yet. Dalton immediately threw himself down, determined to redeem himself. "I've got this," he snapped. Elena said nothing. She crouched nearby, scanning the wind, the shifting light, the mirage-like distortions in the air. Dalton fired once, twice, 3 times. Each shot missed wide, the frustration in his curses growing louder. With only minutes left, Elena knew what she had to do. "Move," she said quietly. Dalton glared at her, fury blazing in his eyes. "No." Harris stepped forward. "We're out of time, Dalton. Let her take it." For a moment, Elena thought he might refuse. But finally, with a growl of frustration, he shoved himself aside. She lay prone, adjusted her scope and let her mind still. The distance, the wind, the heat shimmer, she accounted for them all in a single breath. Then she fired. The shot rang out, echoing across the cliffs. A half-second later, the clang of steel answered back. Bullseye. The clang of steel still echoed faintly in the canyon when the 4 recruits began their descent from the cliffs. The desert wind whipped around them, carrying the last notes of Elena's 3rd perfect shot away into the emptiness. Their packs felt heavier, their bodies aching from hours of exertion, but the silence pressing down on them was heavier still. Harris and Leung exchanged quick, almost relieved glances, but Dalton stalked ahead with his jaw tight, his movements jerky with unspent anger. Elena remained at the back of the group, her rifle secured against her shoulder, her face calm. Inside, however, she knew the storm was coming. They reached the rendezvous point with only minutes to spare. The instructors were waiting, clipboards in hand, their eyes sharp as they scanned the weary recruits. Sergeant Kovacs, as always, looked unreadable. He checked the team's time, confirmed their completed objectives, and gave a single curt nod. "You met the standard. Dismissed." That was all. No praise, no acknowledgement of the difficulty, only a clipped confirmation. For Elena it was enough. For Dalton, it was a wound that cut deeper than any physical exhaustion. Back at camp, the mood shifted almost immediately. Word of the successful mission spread quickly among the other recruits. By nightfall, Elena's name was being whispered again, but this time not as a joke or a dismissal. She had done it again, 3 targets, 3 impossible shots, all under the crushing pressure of time and terrain. Harris and Leung spoke openly of her skill, recounting the shots with a kind of awe. But admiration bred resentment as easily as it bred respect. The camp divided in ways that were less about lines on paper and more about unspoken loyalties. Some recruits gravitated toward Elena, seeking her quiet guidance. Others clung to Dalton, feeding off his bitterness and pride. That night, the tension finally broke. Elena was sitting at her bunk, cleaning her rifle in the dim yellow light, when Dalton approached. His boots scraped the floor with each heavy step, drawing the attention of the room. Conversations quieted, eyes turned. "You think you're better than everyone else?" Dalton's voice was low but hard, dripping with accusation. Elena didn't look up from her work. "I don't think about it." "Bullshit," he snapped. "You've been showing me up in front of everyone, trying to make me look like a fool." Elena finally raised her eyes, meeting his glare with calm steadiness. "I'm not trying to make you look like anything. I'm just doing my job." The room held its breath. Harris shifted uneasily on his bunk, ready to intervene if things escalated. Leung sat perfectly still, watching with that same quiet intensity he always carried. Dalton's fists clenched at his sides, his pride battling his restraint. For a moment it seemed like he might lash out physically. But instead, he spat on the ground near her boots and muttered, "We'll see how long that luck of yours lasts." Then he turned and stormed out, the tension in the barracks loosening only after he was gone. Elena returned to her rifle, her hands steady. But inside she felt a flicker of unease. Dalton wasn't just another arrogant recruit. His resentment was growing into something dangerous, something that could undermine more than just training exercises. And in the unforgiving environment of the program, where teamwork could mean the difference between success and failure, that kind of division could prove fatal. The instructors must have sensed the undercurrents as well, because the following week they announced a new phase of training, one that would push every recruit beyond their limits. It was called Nightfall, a grueling simulation designed to mimic real combat conditions. Teams would be deployed into the desert after dark, tasked with navigating hostile terrain, evading simulated enemy patrols, and hitting a series of designated targets under low-visibility conditions. Unlike the previous exercise, failure here wasn't just about missed points. Nightfall was infamous for breaking recruits physically and mentally. The announcement sent ripples of unease through the camp. Some tried to mask their nerves with jokes, others grew silent. Elena felt no fear, only focus. She knew this was where her discipline and calm under pressure would be tested most. But she also knew that Dalton would see this as his chance to eclipse her once and for all. As dusk fell on the day of nightfall, the recruits assembled in full gear. The desert was transformed under the fading light, its harsh edges softening into shadows, the horizon bleeding into deep purples and blacks. The temperature dropped sharply, the heat of day replaced by a biting chill. Elena's team was assigned again together, Dalton, Harris, Leung, and herself. She saw the flicker of anger in Dalton's eyes when the assignments were read, but he said nothing. The instructors gave them their objectives. 4 targets spread across a 10-mile sector, each placed in near-impossible positions, each guarded by roving patrol drones programmed to simulate enemy forces. 6 hours. No margin for error. They set out into the night, the desert vast and silent around them. The stars stretched overhead like a million cold eyes, the moon casting long, distorted shadows across the sand. Their boots crunched softly as they moved, every sound magnified in the stillness. Elena led the way, compass steady in her hand, eyes scanning constantly. Dalton muttered under his breath, but for once he kept pace without complaint. Harris followed close behind, his nerves evident but his resolve firm. Leung brought up the rear, silent as ever, his eyes sharp in the dark. The first target was concealed among the skeletal remains of an old watchtower, half buried in sand. The patrol drones swept the area in wide arcs, their mechanical whirs slicing through the silence. Elena dropped to her belly, inching forward, her body pressed flat against the ground. She signaled the others to hold back. Through her scope, she spotted the faint glint of steel wedged into the tower's crumbling wall. The angle was narrow, the distance punishing, and the drones left almost no window for error. Dalton crawled up beside her. "I'll take this one," he hissed. Elena studied his face, shadowed in the moonlight. Pride burned there but also desperation. She hesitated, then nodded once. "Fine. But wait for the gap in the patrol." He scowled as if insulted by the advice, but he held his fire until the drones swept past. Then he exhaled and pulled the trigger. The shot cracked, echoing too loudly in the night. Sparks exploded off the tower just inches from the target, but it wasn't a clean hit. Worse, the noise drew the drones back immediately, their sensors flaring red as they zeroed in on the source of the sound. "Move!" Elena snapped. The team scattered, diving into the sand as the drones unleashed bursts of simulated fire. Red beams slashed across the ground, marking hits that would have meant instant death in a real combat zone. Elena rolled behind a boulder, her mind already recalculating. They had only seconds before the drones locked onto them completely. She steadied her rifle, slowed her breathing, and aimed again at the target through the chaos. The drones whirred closer, their sensors sweeping like searchlights. She exhaled, squeezed the trigger, and fired. This time the clang of steel rang out clear and sharp. The target was down. The drones paused, recalibrated, and then dispersed, fooled by the simulated rules of the exercise. Harris let out a shaky laugh of relief. Dalton cursed under his breath. Leung simply nodded once, his eyes meeting Elena's in quiet acknowledgement. "One down," Elena said, her voice calm despite the adrenaline still surging through her veins. 3 to go. The desert night swallowed their footsteps as the 4 recruits pushed deeper into the simulation zone. The wind had picked up, carrying with it a dry, whispering hiss that threaded through the sand dunes like a warning. Their packs felt heavier now, shoulders aching beneath the weight, but none of them dared complain. After the chaos of the first target, the silence felt fragile, as though even the wrong breath could shatter it. Elena led the way, her compass steady, her mind running through distances, landmarks, and the ticking clock. Dalton trailed close behind, his jaw tight, his silence more dangerous than his words. Harris and Leung kept pace at the rear, both visibly tense but focused. The second target was marked on their map as being concealed within a collapsed bunker, half buried under a ridge of sandstone. When they reached it nearly 40 minutes later, The structure loomed like a skeleton against the starlit horizon. Jagged beams jutted upward from the sand, casting long black shadows that seemed to twist with the shifting wind. The patrol drones circled again, their red sensors sweeping arcs across the ground like the gaze of mechanical predators. Elena dropped to one knee, scanning the wreckage through her scope. She spotted the faint shimmer of steel deep within the ruin, another plate, this one positioned in the hollow of a broken support beam. The angle was narrow, nearly impossible, and made worse by the shifting patrols. "Wind steady coming from the west," Elena murmured. "Target's in the hollow about 600 out. Needs a clean shot." Dalton shifted beside her, his expression hard. "I'll do it." Elena glanced at him, her face unreadable. "You missed the first one. If you miss again we'll have every drone in the sector on us." His glare sharpened. "I said I'll do it." Harris leaned in nervously. "Maybe we should let Elena." Dalton cut him off with a snarl. "Shut up. I've got it." He slid forward, settling his rifle into position. His breathing came fast, uneven, and Elena could see the tension in his shoulders. He wasn't calm, wasn't focused, he was desperate. She wanted to stop him, but before she could speak, his finger tightened on the trigger. The shot cracked across the night, too loud, too sharp. The bullet slammed into the sand just inches from the target, spraying dirt into the air. The drones whirred instantly, red sensors flaring to life as they converged on the bunker. "Move!" Elena snapped. The team scattered as beams of simulated fire slashed through the night. Harris dove behind a collapsed wall, Leung pressed himself flat into the sand, and Elena sprinted forward, sliding into cover behind a jagged beam. Dalton cursed loudly, fumbling with his rifle as the drones swept closer. Elena exhaled sharply, forcing herself into stillness. Through her scope, she tracked the target again, ignoring the chaos, ignoring the whine of drones closing in. Her breathing slowed, her heart steadied, and for a moment, time itself seemed to pause. She squeezed the trigger. The rifle cracked. The bullet struck true, the clang of steel echoing through the bunker. The target was down. The drones paused, recalibrated, and dispersed once again. Silence returned, broken only by Dalton's frustrated breathing. Harris let out a shaky laugh of relief. "That's two," he said, his voice unsteady. Elena stood slowly, reloading her rifle with calm precision. She didn't look at Dalton, but she could feel his fury radiating like heat. His pride was bleeding, cut deeper with every failure, every success of hers. And she knew it was only a matter of time before that pride turned reckless. The third target was farther out, positioned near an abandoned outpost nearly 3 miles to the east. The trek was brutal. The sand dunes seemed endless, the cold of the night biting at their exposed skin, the silence stretching heavy between them. Dalton walked several paces ahead now, his shoulders stiff, his movements jerky. Harris and Leung exchanged uneasy glances but said nothing. Elena kept her eyes forward, her focus unshaken. When they reached the outpost, the structure loomed like a ghost in the dark. Rusted fences sagged against the sand, and a broken radio tower jutted upward like a spear into the night sky. The target was hidden somewhere inside, and the drones patrolled in tighter, more erratic patterns here, making every movement dangerous. Elena crouched, scanning the outpost through her scope. The target revealed itself after a few tense moments, wedged into the collapsed frame of a barracks window, barely visible against the shadows. It was a cruel placement, designed to break focus, to force a mistake. "Target's in the barracks window," she murmured. 800 out, wind shifting northeast. Dalton stepped forward immediately. "Mine." Elena's jaw tightened. "You've already?" "I said it's mine." His voice was a sharp hiss, louder than it should have been. Harris raised a hand cautiously. "Dalton, maybe we should let." Dalton whirled on him, his teeth bared. "Say another word and I'll—" "Enough." Elena's voice cut through his threat like a blade. She met his glare steadily, her face calm but firm. "This isn't about you. This is about the mission. You keep missing, we all fail. Do you understand?" For a moment she thought he might snap. His fists clenched, his breathing ragged, his pride screaming for release. But then, with a growl of frustration, he dropped to the sand, shouldered his rifle, and fired. The shot rang out, sparks exploding off the metal frame of the barracks. A miss. The drones whirred instantly, their sensors flaring red as they converged. "Damn it." Dalton cursed, firing again, missing again. The drones swooped closer, beams slashing through the sand. Harris and Leung scrambled for cover. Elena exhaled, sliding into position, her scope locking onto the target. Her breath slowed, her world narrowing to the window and the stillness inside her. She squeezed the trigger. The bullet flew true, slamming into the plate with a clear, ringing clang. The drones paused, recalibrated, and dispersed. 3 targets down. Elena reloaded calmly, but her hands were not entirely steady this time. Not from fear, but from the tension building between her and Dalton. She could feel his hatred burning hotter with every success she claimed, every failure he endured. Harris glanced between them nervously, sensing the fracture widening. Leung said nothing, but his eyes followed Dalton carefully, watchful and sharp. They moved on in silence, the final target waiting somewhere in the darkness. The map marked it near a canyon 2 miles south, a treacherous stretch of terrain where shadows twisted into illusions and sound carried strangely in the wind. It would be the hardest shot yet, and Elena knew instinctively that Dalton would try to claim it, no matter the risk. As they marched, the tension finally snapped. Dalton slowed until he was walking beside her, his voice a low growl meant only for her ears. "You think you're better than me, don't you?" Elena didn't look at him. "I don't think about you." His hand twitched near his rifle strap. "One day, Ramirez, you're going to slip. And when you do, I'll be there to watch you fall." She met his gaze then, her eyes calm but cold. "Maybe. But not tonight." He sneered, then pushed ahead, leading the way toward the canyon. Harris and Leung followed cautiously, glancing back at Elena as if silently asking if everything was under control. She gave a small, steady nod, though inside her mind was alert, calculating. Dalton wasn't just a rival anymore. He was a danger, to her, to the mission, to the entire team. And as the canyon loomed closer, its jagged walls swallowing the starlight, Elena knew that the final test of the night wouldn't be about the target at all. It would be about survival, hers and the team's. The mission that followed was unlike anything Elena had faced before. The desert operation had proven her skill, yes, but that was still controlled chaos. An orchestrated battlefield where she had backup, clear parameters, and a narrow focus. This time, the command was sending her halfway across the world to a city known only in briefings and whispered warnings, a dense sprawl of crumbling high-rises, bomb-scarred alleyways, and a skyline that hid enemies as easily as it hid civilians. Intelligence reports said an enemy commander, elusive and lethal, would be there. His presence had kept entire regions destabilized for months. Eliminating him was deemed impossible by many, not only because of his security detail, but because he never appeared in predictable patterns. Yet somehow, Elena's name was placed at the top of the assignment list. Her teammates didn't take the news quietly. When the orders were read aloud, a ripple went through the unit like a shockwave. "Her? You're putting this whole thing on her?" one of the corporals muttered, shaking his head. "We've got seasoned snipers who've been in this longer." Another voice added, "What if she misses? That city will turn into a nightmare if she does." Though no one said it outright, Elena heard the same old suspicion threading through their voices. To them, the impossible shot in the desert was still luck, a lightning strike that wouldn't repeat. And yet, command stood firm. They had watched her under pressure, seen her patience, studied her stillness in chaos. Where others saw chance, command saw calculation. Elena was their best option, and perhaps their only one. The city hit her senses like a storm the moment boots touched pavement. The smell of oil fires clung to the air, mixed with something acrid and metallic that turned the stomach. Echoes of distant shouting threaded through narrow streets, punctuated by the rumble of generators and the occasional bark of automatic fire. Buildings leaned like exhausted giants, their windows shattered, their walls tattooed with years of conflict. Civilians moved quickly, their eyes avoiding soldiers, slipping into shadowed doorways with an instinct born of survival. For Elena, every sound, every movement mattered. She wasn't just here to shoot. She was here to disappear into the environment, to watch and wait until the moment the impossible target revealed himself. The team set up in a half-collapsed building overlooking the sector where intelligence suggested the commander might appear. The vantage point was precarious. Rooftop edges that crumbled if you leaned too far, stairwells half-gutted by shelling, floors coated in dust thick enough to record every boot print. Still, Elena made it her nest. She lay prone for hours at a time, scanning streets through her scope, marking patrol routes, mapping how shadows shifted with the sun. Her spotter, a wiry sergeant named Davis, spoke in hushed tones beside her, relaying range adjustments, noting potential lines of sight. He, at least, seemed to believe in her. "You're the only one who can make this work," he whispered once during a lull. She only nodded because words felt like wasted energy when focus was so fragile. The enemy commander was a ghost. Days bled into nights with no sign of him. Elena watched others instead. Children darting through rubble, mothers carrying water jugs, armed men dragging crates of ammunition through alleys. Every time she looked through her scope, she was reminded of the stakes, not just the mission but the lives that shifted unknowingly under her gaze. This wasn't target practice in a desert. A missed shot here wasn't just failure, it was collateral damage, lives broken in the blink of an eye. And that weight was heavier than any rifle. Then, on the 5th day it happened. A convoy of black vehicles rolled into the sector, engines growling, armored doors swinging open. Soldiers poured out, forming a perimeter, rifles at the ready. And then, amidst the chaos, he appeared, the commander, taller than expected, his frame draped in dark fatigues, a pistol at his side. He moved like a man who thought himself untouchable, surrounded by muscle, insulated by loyalty. The moment Elena saw him, her breath stilled, her body freezing into that familiar quiet where the world narrowed to a single point. The shot itself was nearly unthinkable. The convoy had stopped on a street lined with broken cars and jagged debris. Soldiers circled constantly, bodies shifting unpredictably. The target was surrounded, moving, pausing, moving again. And worse, the wind had picked up, funneled between buildings in swirling gusts that could throw a bullet off course. Davis muttered under his breath, "No one's making that shot, Ramirez. Not from this angle. Too much interference." Elena didn't answer. She couldn't. Words now would break the fragile balance forming inside her. She adjusted her scope. Her world shrank. The commander's face, half-shadowed by a cap, the subtle movement of his chest as he spoke, the tiny gestures he made to his men. She calculated distance, just over a kilometer. Factored wind, gusting irregularly, she would have to anticipate its weakest moment. She tracked his pacing, predicting the pattern of his steps. Every element fought against her, every law of probability screamed for failure. But inside her, there was no fear. Only that deep, unshakable focus she had carried since childhood. Seconds stretched into an eternity. Elena waited, her finger hovering, her breath slow. Then silence in the wind. A gap so small most would never feel it. She squeezed the trigger. The rifle kicked, the sound swallowed by the city's chaos. Through the scope, she watched the impossible unfold. The commander staggered, his body snapping back, collapsing into the dust. For a moment, the street froze, his guards shocked, their disbelief written in their movements. Then pandemonium erupted, soldiers shouting, civilians scattering. Davis exhaled sharply, almost laughing. "You did it? Holy hell, Ramirez, you actually did it?" His voice was disbelief and relief twisted together. Elena didn't smile. She simply pulled back, dismantled her rifle with steady hands, and prepared to vanish before the enemy traced the shot. It wasn't celebration she felt, but a quiet certainty. They had doubted her once again. And once again she had proven them wrong, not with bravado or argument, but with precision, patience, and the will to see the impossible as simply inevitable.